Whether this is your first annual meeting or your 40th, there's always something to learn prior to the event. This week, Amy Whitfield joins me to cover some of the finer points of the annual meeting on this episode of The Road to New Orleans, presented by New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. Welcome again to this week's episode of The Road to New Orleans. And I know in the intro I said Amy Whitfield would be joining us. Well, that's not the case. She was unable to join us, but I got the next best thing. Not Amy Whitfield, Nathan Finn.
I'm happy to be the B team for Amy Whitfield.
Well, I mean, it's a B plus team if you have to ask me. I mean,
I like that.
You know, B plus at least, Nathan, at least. Maybe an A minus, but at least
I like that. I can live with that, Jonathan.
Okay, many of you know Nathan as the recording secretary for the Southern Baptist Convention. We're going to talk about his role a little bit later in the episode here, but Nathan is going to join us, and we're going to talk a little bit about messenger information, things you need to know to do business in New Orleans as a messenger. So Nathan, we're going to start off, let's just, 30,000 foot view, and then we'll go back down. What is the role of the messenger in the annual meeting?
So the role of the messenger is to do the work of the Southern Baptist Convention. We often speak about the Southern Baptist Convention being a convention of churches, and that is 100% true. But there's also a sense in which the Southern Baptist Convention is the annual meeting. And the annual meeting is not an annual meeting of churches, it's an annual meeting of messengers who've been chosen by their churches to gather together and do the business of the Southern Baptist Convention. So the messengers are there to worship and they're there to fellowship, but first and foremost, they're there to do the work of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. This year's Southern Baptist Convention on June the 13th and 14th in New Orleans. Many of you know that. If you're watching this episode, you're probably planning on coming. So we're looking forward to seeing you in New Orleans. One thing for messengers, now this is not required, it is helpful, regardless of how many you've been to, how many annual meetings you've been to, and especially if it's your first, second, or third convention and you're really interested in the business of the convention. On Monday, June 12th, 4:45 in the New Orleans Convention Center, rooms 208, 209, 210, they all combined. You'll see the crowd, you'll see the signs. Messenger orientation. Now, Nathan, you're going to be a part of this as well. There's going to be kind of a panel talking about how messengers do business. So we've talked about what the messengers are. They're there to do business. This covers important items of how to do the business.
Correct. I wish I would have known 16 or 17 years ago when I went to my first Southern Baptist Convention that there was such a thing as a messenger's orientation. It's a fantastic opportunity, especially like you're saying, Jonathan, for somebody who's relatively new to attending the annual meeting, to learn what we do. So we're going to get together and we're going to explain things like what sort of business does the SBC do? What's the difference between a motion and a resolution? What's the right way to ask a question or seek to get an amendment put forward? What's the difference between a recommendation? What's a point of order? We're going to explain all those things so that people are prepared. They have as much information as possible to be good messengers and do good work on behalf of the churches that have sent them. We're also going to have with us what we call the Messengers Parliamentarians. So every year, the Southern Baptist Convention has a team of parliamentarians, and one of them is designated as the Messengers Parliamentarian. And it's his or her issue. It'll be or job. It'll be a him this year. It's his job to really represent the people and to be available at the front during the annual meeting for anybody to come up and say, hey, I have a question. I want to be sure I know how to make a motion. I want to know when's the right time to ask a question. Well, what's the best way to word a motion? And by going up to the front of the convention hall, folks will see that there's a section that says Messengers Parliamentarian, and they'll have the opportunity to talk to and get some coaching from the parliamentarian about the best way to do business. Again, our goal is to empower messengers to do what their churches have sent them to do. And this meeting and the Messengers Parliamentarian are two of the ways that we're trying to get resources into the hands of messengers so that they can do their work effectively.
Yeah, and the messengers have a voice throughout the convention. Many ways that they exercise it is at the microphone. There's other ways messengers have a voice at the convention by voting. I mean, you're raising the ballots. You're making your voice known, whether it's raising ballots, filling out an election ballot, or whatever it may be. But there are a lot of opportunities for messengers to have that voice. And one of the things that we've been really conscious about and really trying to enhance is giving the messengers that voice. And one of the ways that they can do that, you mentioned the motions. And it was something I wanted to talk about. It's good that we have you on here because your role as recording secretary, you're the one who's processing those motions. You're not the one making decisions on them, but you're the one that has to take it. So, if Jonathan stands up at microphone 2 and says, I make a motion that, blah, whatever it is. You record that. I mean, that's in the word recording secretary, you are recording that. You are recording that for posterity. Because in the annual, it'll say Jonathan Howell, Tennessee.
So Jonathan,
move that.
What would make my life a lot easier, especially
what would help?
Freshly minted recording secretary serving my very first convention in this role, is if folks who know they're going to be making a motion in advance do one of two things.
Yes.
They either pre-submit that motion through the SBC annual meeting app, or they email me at recordingsecretary@sbc.net and send me a copy of that motion.
Yes.
It's always easier whenever we have word for word what someone is going to say in written form, rather than simply listening and trying to make sure that we get it correct.
Yes.
And we're going to do our due diligence and we're going to double check.
Yeah.
But the more information that we have in advance, the more accurately we're going to be able to tell the story of what's happening at the Southern Baptist Convention.
And it's important too for the messengers, because at some point you have to turn in your motion. You've either got to fill it out on a page, a piece of paper, and hand it to a page and they bring it up to you, or you print it out, you hand it to the page, and then they bring it up. So if you're going to write it, pre-write it and everything, go ahead, and I totally agree. You can do this in the app. If you open up the app on your phone, there's a button there that says pre-file, and you can pre-file your motion or amendment. It actually opens up an email to the email address that you said. We'll put it on the screen below, recordingsecretary@sbc.net, and that will come to Nathan, and Nathan will have a copy of that. You don't need to do it now. I mean, we're releasing this a couple weeks before the annual meeting. You could do it up until the morning of, or like during the meeting. We take stuff during that, and we'll talk about this during the actual meeting as well. We'll remind people that, hey, if you want to pre-file or you want to send it in, or if you're going to make an amendment, that's a lot of help, because we're peeling back the curtain here a little bit, look behind the curtain. If you're making an amendment to something, say you want to amend either a recommendation or you want to amend a resolution, those are the two big things that people amend. If you send in that amendment, we can have that, throw it up on the screen for people to see it and understand what you're talking about and vote on it, because that amendment is going to have to be processed one way or the other. And I'm going to have to try to get it on the screen, and I'm the one doing this actually. So if you send it in, I've got it ready, loaded. It makes everything quicker. It makes it better for the messengers, and everybody's informed. So that's something we started, last year, I believe, and or year 2, and it's been very helpful.
A pre-prepared paper trail, try saying that fast 3 times, a pre-prepared paper trail contributes to transparency.
Yeah.
And the greater transparency is that's there, the easier it's going to be for messengers to do their work.
And because messengers are more informed that way. They're able to have the information, we put it on the screens, and everybody knows exactly what they're voting on. I think there's been some questions in the past. I know there's been points in the past where I'm lost. I'm looking at the daily bulletin. I'm trying to figure out, what are we talking about here? Whereas is this person in or resolved? They're trying to edit or add something. It's always easier if we can throw it up on the screens. We've made that technology available. We've got the ability to do that. So if you have that, send those in. recordingsecretary@sbc.net. So, we've talked a lot about messengers at the microphones. I just mentioned a minute ago, you come into the microphone, you're making a motion, making an amendment, whatever it may be. Don't forget, if you pre-file, it doesn't count unless you're at the microphone. So you've got to come to the microphone, actually make it, read it into the proceedings of the convention. One key on that, though, Nathan, is to make sure that you read it how you wrote it. Because if you
Absolutely.
deviate, what you say is the official thing, because that's what everybody hears, regardless of what you submit. What you say is the official reading of your motion.
That's right. I cannot impress upon messengers enough. Write out what you're going to say in advance. Stick to that script. Make sure that you're communicating as clearly as you possibly can, because messengers want to know what you're really thinking. And the more you process out loud while you're there, the harder it is for everybody.
Yeah.
And so go ahead and write it out in advance. And this is super important. We see this almost every year. But if you're up there at the microphone, you need to understand there's going to be a funny echo.
Yeah.
And it's going to sound funny to you in that moment standing at the microphone, but it's not going to sound funny to anybody else.
Until you slow down trying to match it.
So as much as possible, if you're up there at the microphone, tune out the sound of your own voice and just speak as clearly and normally as you can into the microphone, reading off that sheet of paper or that smartphone or that iPad, preferably. And what's going to happen is everybody's going to hear you clearly. It's going to sound natural. Even if it sounds a little weird to you, it's going to sound totally normal to everybody else, and everybody's going to be prepared to do their business as messengers.
Yeah. So, and the reason, we've tried to do whatever we can to try to eliminate those delays, but the problem is it's just a big arena. I mean, a big room. Yeah. Like if you go to a sporting event, you go to a concert, something like that. I went to a concert recently, and I guarantee you, when she was singing, it wasn't the same time as I was hearing it up in the 200, in section 210. It takes time for things to get there. So there's a delay. It's always like that. It's just because of the size of the room that we're in, you're going to have that weird audio delay. So just like Nathan said, if you have it written out, focus on what you're writing. Don't worry about watching up there or whatever, but focus on what you're reading, not what you're writing. But do that beforehand. But focus on what you're reading and just blow through it, get done. And everybody in the room is going to appreciate that, and they're going to understand what's going on. So those are very important things. Especially on the don't deviate from, because I talked about what you're reading into it. There are certain words, certain phrases that if you put in a motion, it automatically rules them out of order. Like if you're directing an entity, like this, that's bylaws. We can't file motions that direct an entity to do something. So if you request, that's one thing. If you demand that, that word change right there, just that little word change makes your whole motion out of order. So.
Yep.
All right. One other piece. So we've talked about motions. We talked about some, the amendments that people make, maybe during resolutions or recommendations, things like that. Another time that people come to the mics are Q&As with entity heads. So, that's always something, and I know it's always something people are, the eyebrows raise if so-and-so's at a microphone and a certain entity head's at the stage. It just happens. I mean, we all kind of watch and go, oh, look who's at microphone 3, something like that. That does happen, but it's good because this is a great opportunity for people to have questions of entities to ask them.
Absolutely. So remember, the entity heads have carved out this time because they want to answer questions. Let me say that again. They want to answer questions. But if you want your question to be answered as clearly as possible, you need to ask your question as clearly as possible. What I've seen innumerable times over the year is a pontification in the form of a question. And then the pontificator gets frustrated when they feel like the answer is kind of quick and it's off the cuff and then it's moving right along. And everybody knows it's pontificating. You may want to pontificate. Email that agency head and pontificate. Mm-hmm. They're big boys. They can handle that. But for the question, make it just as clear, as precise, as pointed as it can possibly be. And I promise you, those guys are going to answer those questions. And if they didn't, they would. But if they didn't, messengers will rise up and demand that they do it.
Well,
But don't
I don't know about the
don't
rise up in demand part, but they will
well
be like, well, he
in a
didn't answer that question.
in a
Yeah.
Christ-like sort of way, you know.
Yes. Yes.
But in all seriousness, it's not the time to pontificate or to grandstand or to make a statement in form of a question. Just get up and ask the question.
Yeah.
Those are good men. They want to answer the questions. They want messengers to have as much information as possible. That's why we have a book of reports. That's why they give their reports. That's why we have the time for Q&A. So
Yeah.
just be ready, just like with making a motion. Have that question written out, have it as clear as possible. Get up, Dr. So-and-so, you said, what did you mean?
Yeah.
This happened. What was it about?
Yeah.
Can you help us understand? They're going to answer those questions.
And I would also say, don't feel like you have to wait till the annual meeting if you have a question.
Absolutely.
Every one of our entity heads, I have, like, time and time again, I have heard from people that had questions about whatever's going on at whatever entity. And I ask them, well, have you emailed them? Have you asked? Well, no. Well, you should do that. Okay, they'll do it. And they'll come back to me and go, hey, they answered my question. Well, because they do.
Yeah.
And like you
Yeah.
said, like, they want to answer the question. They don't want Southern Baptists who are unclear about things that are going on at their entity or whatever it may be. They will answer your questions. They do answer your questions. And all you got to do is really reach out and ask. So, but so if you do have a question that's pressing, don't wait until the 5 minutes that you may have, because you may not get to the chance to the microphone. But you always have a chance. Pick up the phone, email, whatever it may be. Nathan will be glad to give you any of their cell phones. So I know he's got them all.
Yeah.
No, he's got them all. All right. We've talked a few times about some resources that are available to messengers to help them do the business of the convention while they're there. One of the big resources is the Book of Reports, something that you and I worked on kind of together, getting that done and out the door. Allison Young did a lot of work on that as well here at our office. But that's got a lot of information on it. You wrote a little short story at Baptist Press, not a story, but a first person about the Book of Reports. It's available in the app on your phone. It's also available at the website. So just say a minute, a word about the Book of Reports, Nathan.
Book of Reports is great. So every year we get it out late spring. It's available prior to the annual meeting. You can look at it electronically during the annual meeting. And the Book of Reports includes two main components. On the one hand, it has the statistical information that you're looking for. How many missionaries, how many seminary students, how much cooperative program dollars, what was the budget for? Has all that information. It also has a narrative report from each of our denominational ministries, where the key leaders, often the agency head and or the chair of the board, tell the story of that entity and what's happened over the last year. What are the high points? What's going on? What are they celebrating? And if there's been a motion that was made that was relevant to one of those denominational ministries, they'll also include their response to that motion. So it is the best one-stop shop to get the information about what's happened over the last 12 months in those Southern Baptist agencies.
Yeah. So there's a story at Baptist Press about the Book of Reports, as well as Nathan's first person about that. So I'd encourage you to download that, look at that, read those reports before you come, because you're going to hear, people reference the Book of Reports as found on page blank in the Book of Reports. So you get one of those whenever you check in as a messenger, whenever you register, but you also can download that and look at it in the app on your phone. Another piece of, really good resources for Southern Baptist and in the room is the Daily Bulletin. So if it didn't, basically the rule is if it didn't make it in the Book of Reports, it makes it in the Bulletin.
Right. So the Daily Bulletin is going to have additional supplemental information that has come in, but the greatest emphasis is going to be the business of the prior day. And so the things that have happened, the proceedings, kind of our first run on telling the story of the convention comes from the Daily Bulletin. So that's where, for example, on Wednesday, you're going to be able to see what are the resolutions that are coming forward. What is the response to the motions that were made the day before? Who got elected to what's? All of that information between the Book of Reports, which gives you the long view, and the Daily Bulletin that gives you the recent history. those are going to be the two main resources for doing
Yeah.
the business of Southern Baptists.
Yeah, and also included in the daily bulletin will be the reports from the Committee on Nominations, the
Right.
final report there that you'll be, that messengers will be asked to approve or have a chance to amend. And there's also
That's a great reminder.
Yeah.
All of those lists that were released through
Yeah.
Baptist Press, they were up to date at the moment they were
Yeah.
released, but there's always minor changes.
Always
that are
changes.
made. Yeah.
Always some changes. And then also the Committee on Committees report. So the Committee on Committees that was appointed by President Bart Barber, they will bring a report to the convention of the Committee on Nominations that will work for the next year to bring those trustee recommendations like you will approve, or not approve, but vote on. I'm assuming the approval there, that you'll have this year. So, you've got those committee reports. You mentioned the resolutions. Those are always given in the daily bulletin as well. So a lot of information available to you as a messenger. We do everything we can to get them all in the app as well as printed copies as best we can. And there's going to be some information from the Sex Abuse Task Force in the daily bulletin as well this year. There'll be some resources that they're going to be passing out also available in the app. So again, download the app. I think that's kind of one of the rules here is sbcannualmeeting.net/app.
So Jonathan, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
You're mentioning the app. What are some of the other resources in the app besides these electronic documents that we've already talked about that would be helpful to messengers?
All right. Well, now you got me wondering about that. So I should know this. All right. So the big thing is the event listing. So here's the app right here. I've got it up on the phone. If you can go to the event schedule, you've got all the information there. We talked about this a few weeks ago on the Road to New Orleans. You can go back and look at that too. But there's maps, there's exhibits. You've got candidate information. So there's if you go to candidates and click on recording secretary, there's Nathan Finn's mug because he's being announced as a candidate for recording secretary again this year. So how old is that picture, Nathan?
It's not that recent, Jonathan, but that's okay.
Thanks for bringing that up. But you got Nathan Finn there, and you've got some social media stuff. You got the Lifeway information. We talked about that as well, all the Lifeway sales events. That pre-file button right there, middle at the bottom, right there says pre-file, and it tells you exactly what's going on. It gives you the email address. You can click on pre-file your motion. It opens up a new email. You can pop it right in there.
That's where the magic happens, Jonathan.
Everything you need right there. Yep. So that's available for you as well, and it's all right there, as well as news. You got all the news from the SBC annual meeting. Everything. Just scroll through, and you can read all the latest news, as well as the Road to New Orleans. You can watch all the episodes of the Road to New Orleans right there on the app, and including this one. So it's like Inception here or something. I don't know, but. Yeah, so the app's got everything you need for the week. And Nathan, I really appreciate you taking the time. Anything in closing that you'd like to encourage the messengers with as we head to New Orleans?
Messengers, just remember, you have a very important job. You're there to celebrate, but you're also there to do the work of the convention. So ask questions, be involved, vote, be in the room where it happens.
Yep.
And be a part of what God is doing in, among, and through Southern Baptists.
All right. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you, Nathan, for taking the time to join us this week and making up for Amy's absence. And thank you for watching at home this week on the Road to New Orleans, presented by New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary.